So in this segment, we're going to be talking about post-Brexit checks on goods from the EU into the UK announced after a delay. So I'm pretty late to this one, but I think it's important to discuss for a couple of different reasons. Most notably, the fact that the UK look to be lowering kind of checks for the rest of the world in order to lowering the checks for the rest of the world to bring it into line with the checks we're doing for EU goods, or planning to do. It will make more sense towards the end of the video anyways. So post-Brexit checks on goods coming into the UK from the EU are to be reduced and simplified. The UK government has announced a new target operating model involving fewer checks and bureaucracy and more digitisation, backed by more than £1 billion of funding, which definitely doesn't sound like it's enough, has been announced to, quote, minimise trade burdens and maintain border security while remaining aligned with international standards, end quote. So now they have announced that after constant delays, we have seen minimal checks on EU goods and goods coming in via the EU. The latter is important because we're assuming those goods are safe, but that might not be the case. We've seen people try to get tainted meats into the UK via the Dover port. We don't know how much of that stuff got through, but they have managed to stop some of it at least. I don't have a lot of faith in the new system, and it still puts us. It potentially would have put us in breach of WTO rules, because we are still treating EU goods differently to other WTO members. But that'll only, once this whole system is done, I think we will be finally adhering to WTO rules on most favoured nations. The government has delayed putting in place checks 4 times, which are legally required under the trade agreement with the EU due to worries about port disruption. The delays have caused considerable friction with Brussels. I don't think it's caused that. It's caused delays, yes. I don't think it's caused that much friction with the EU though. And, the reason it's been delayed is down to costs and other things. MOG admitted some products would go up between 10 to 70% depending on goods. It was great reporting from Rachel Venables for when she was working for LBC, and MOG talked about how we can get fish fingers cheaper, and she was like, are you joking? We would have seen more shelf shortages as well. We have already seen some when the start of the year kicked off with tomatoes and bell peppers, which are the best. So yeah, we would have seen way more if these checks were fully implemented. But details of new customs and regulatory processes have now been agreed by the government and are set to be introduced this year and fully implemented by 2027. It is currently a draft, and the government wants business to provide feedback before it's set in stone. And it's 3 years before full implementation. It's about 3 years it's going to take them from here. Around 6 years after the transitional period ended, businesses want certainty. We don't even know who the next government will be at the time of these checks. Could be a Labour one, could be a weakened Tory party, or some sort of coalition. So businesses have no real certainty over this. We know the checks will be phased in, but the phases could be delayed, which we have already seen. Businesses have largely welcomed the proposal, with the British Chamber of Commerce praising, quote, the shift to a digital trading system, end quote, while the Welsh Government said it supports them. A digital system is good when it works. This lot won't get it working for a while. They're rubbish with IT systems and everything else, really. Do you remember all of the issues they're having now with the Chief system, which was meant to be replaced by something else? All of the issues they had with universal credit rollout, it took them years and years to get it out. And it's still not, I think, fully implemented nationwide, despite it being over a decade. A ministerial forward to the document says, quote, it will move us closer to our goal of creating the most effective border in the world by introducing an improved regime of sanitary and phytosanitary and security controls on imports, saying, quote, these controls are essential to maintain our security and biosecurity and will protect us better from our environment and from invasive pests and diseases, protect public health, deliver food that is safe to eat whilst maintaining security of supply for consumers, and disrupt criminal activity before it can cause harm to our communities, end quote. How does this help us get the best border system? You need physical checks on goods coming in. Certain countries require less checks than others, but the ones coming via the EU are the ones we really need to keep an eye on. If these new border systems apply to every country, are just lowering the amount of rest of the world checks and then increasing the EU goods being checked slightly, it doesn't really solve much. It won't give us the best system. Ultimately, I don't know which country has the best system. I'm assuming the EU ones must be really good. I'd have to look at, countries like New Zealand. But we've been lucky to avoid certain invasive illnesses like African swine flu, for example. None of the additional checks or controls in the model will apply to imports into Northern Ireland from the EU following the Windsor Framework agreed by Westminster and the EU in February. And doing checks on goods from Northern Ireland is something the government have consistently said they will not do. They are also looking at allowing Northern Ireland goods to use Irish ports, so to transport goods to GB, since Ireland has bigger ports and more numerous ones. But that will come with its own problems. So the government are trying to help Northern Ireland trade more with GB, but again, Northern Ireland is limited in what it can do due to its size, and ports be expensive. There will be some further checks for Irish goods arriving directly in England, Wales and Scotland from the Republic of Ireland. And it's odd that Ireland faces less export checks for goods arriving into the UK versus France, for example. Maybe the Tories are more focused on the ports on the east side of the country, as they will face more diverse imports from different countries. Rotterdam is a major mover for that kind of stuff. Very odd regarding Ireland, but I think they are consistent with that. Ireland has faced less checks on goods versus other EU members. I could be wrong on that one, but I think that's the case. New changes for EU to UK goods include a pilot trusted trader scheme to allow frequent importers to avoid trade checks. They love trusted trader schemes, I swear to God. Live animals, germinal products, animal products and byproducts, plants and plant products will be categorised as high, medium or low risk with appropriate controls for each one and their country of origin. Simplified and digitised health certificates, support for food businesses who, quote, will need to adapt businesses and supply chains, checks to take place away at the port of Dover to prevent traffic build-ups. And let's look at these. A trusted trader scheme, if done properly, is fine. This might help reduce import checks on EU producers, so helping us to import more fresh food potentially. And that's the main issue. A lot of EU producers don't want to export to the UK because of all of the red tape. They want to bundle their stuff together to kind of reduce the amount of paperwork needed, but the problem is fresh fruit doesn't last that long. You need a good system to sort all of this out. Live animal checks, if the risk levels are done properly, is fine. If you're giving proper risk categories to them, is fine. But I am worried about the agri-food checks because the government have played fast and loose with these rules and are risking a lot of animal and plant-based diseases to enter the UK. Support for businesses is meaningless without details, as is really all of this, ironically. Finally, the checks taking place away from Dover is fine, but these places need to be actually used. We have seen lots of these places that are not used right now, state-of-the-art, multi-million-pound facilities unused, and we need the staff too, vets and customs officers. We will need a lot of them, and I don't think we are close to getting those numbers. Gove said we need around 50,000 staff for all of the post-Brexit checks. Where are all of these new vets going to come from? Are we going to magic them up along with the customs officers and the other people needed to, kind of use these facilities? We don't even know if that number is accurate, 50,000, but they have got nowhere near enough staff, and this is a major doubt. Without the staff, we'll just see more shelf shortages and food price increases. All of this will cost a lot, and it will be the taxpayer and the consumer who pays for this. The taxpayer pays twice because the money will come from central government and local councils. Sad. Fixed timescale. So this is where it gets really weird. So the government said its plans to implement different parts of the model by 3 dates. 31st October 2023, the introduction of health certificates on imports of medium risk animal products, plant products and all of that kind of stuff, right? So we'll see in October how far they get with these basic checks, which they already should be doing. 31st January 2024, introduction of documentary and risk-based identity and physical checks on medium-risk animals, plants and plant products. Less than a year for this one, and that's the end of the timeline. We don't really know what happens after that. There's no, they're saying things are meant to happen in 2027. We don't know what things are going to be happening in the meantime. It does show that the UK probably not doing basic checks on medium-risk agri-foods from the EU, which is very worrying given that there are diseases we have been lucky to avoid so far, and of course the tainted meat which we saw. Imports of animal and plant products from the rest of the world will start to benefit from the model. So yeah, we finally might be able to adhere to WTO rules after all this time, nearly a decade after. William Bain, head of the policy at the BCC, said if the digitisation is done properly, is quote done properly, then smaller firms will see benefits, end quote, in importing goods into Great Britain. And I think the reason they want to simplify the checks so much is that it's putting off EU exporters to export to GB. So by having certain schemes, it makes it easier, but also it makes GB importers' lives easier. The importer has to do paperwork as well. So I think the UK are looking at making things easier for both ends, really. Probably so we can have some security, but to avoid shelf shortages. But overall, I don't think it'll work. We'll have to wait and see, but it's just not. It just doesn't feel feasible. Bain urged, urged the government to stick to its timescale as, quote, providing certainty for businesses is crucial, end quote, and said it was vital for companies in the UK and around the world to properly prepare for change. And I can imagine the UK will keep playing games around the checks and time frame, but for them we have to wait and see. And this is from Michael M on Twitter, who's well worth a follow if you haven't started following him and you want to keep up to date on this stuff. He also posts like random pictures of World War II planes, which I enjoy. So he says reduced from what they're reciprocally meant to be as part of the TCA agreement, but the UK government, more empty shelves, greater prices still can't afford to. So because favouring EU was about what bilaterally agreed is breaking WTO rules, the UK is unilaterally lowering standards checks on all imports. So that's something we mentioned earlier, and it looks like it's very much the case that instead of increasing the checks on EU goods, what the UK is doing is decreasing checks on all goods. And that's obviously a very dangerous road, especially given that the EU has some of the highest standards in the world. There are other countries with high standards, like New Zealand, for example, and I'm sure there are many others which people will mention in the comments, but there are also a lot of countries with the lower standards, looking at the US of A. And so by lowering checks on American food produce and Australian as well, it's a very stupid thing to do in my opinion. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.